So, welcome to the gut health modules. This is such an important topic that we divided it into 4 parts. So, let's get started with part 1. Gut health is incredibly important for our overall health, and the state of our gut plays a huge role in how we respond to foods and the environment, how we absorb nutrients, our hormonal health, our energy and mood, systemic inflammation, how our brain functions, and so much more. But instead of finding the root cause of gut issues, symptoms are commonly addressed with band aid treatments. So, if you have heartburn, you're commonly prescribed an antacid, which further lowers your stomach acid levels, making it worse in the long run. If you have IBS, this is treated with fiber, laxatives, and sometimes an antidepressant. If you have food sensitivities, you're told to just remove that food. But none of these band aids fix the root cause of the issue. And understanding how the digestive system works helps us better understand what the actual root cause is for digestive problems, which is energy production and what we will dive into in these 4 parts. Gut health also impacts what foods you can and cannot tolerate. For example, food sensitivities are commonly a secondary problem and are a result of digestive issues. The gut barrier, when in a healthy state, selectively allows digested nutrients to enter the body when all is ready and it's digested. However, when the integrity of this intestinal barrier has been compromised due to low energy production, food particles can be absorbed systemically before they're fully digested, causing inflammation. Now, food substances that have been consumed for a very, very long time by our ancestors can now all of a sudden cause problems for those with an inflamed, slow, and leaky digestive tract. For example, histamines, oxalates, salicylates, lactose, casein, and the protein in egg whites. Foods that contain these compounds aren't inherently bad, but these are just some examples of compounds that can cause problems for someone with a compromised digestive system. If these compounds aren't fully broken down, they can initiate an inflammatory cascade. But it's not because these foods are bad, it's because of the state of your gut. So improving the function of our entire digestive system is important for overall health. But first, what even is good gut health? Given that we are all in different environments, we have different pasts, we eat different foods, and we have different day-to-day activities, there's no one single way to define a good gut. But in general, when you have a properly functioning digestive system, here are some of these characteristics. First, we should have daily poops, at least 1 time a day, ideally 2 to 3. Ideally, these poops have a solid structure and they're easy to pass. The more we can poop, the better we will feel. And so you should at least be pooping 1 time a day. Second, we should have minimal skin or acne issues. Third, we should not have bloating or stomach discomfort after your meals. And number 4, you should be able to enjoy a wide range of food within reason without experiencing severe issues. You shouldn't have to extremely restrict your food in the long run. So these 4 characteristics can kind of help us better characterize what happens when we have good digestion. Just like every system in the body, digestion is energy dependent. Here's a quote from Dr. Ray Peat, quote, "Systemic metabolic problems make local problems worse," end quote. Thus, thyroid health and energy metabolism are intimately involved since the thyroid is the master metabolic regulator. So in hypothyroidism, there's less stomach acid and other digestive juices. So gas, slow transit time, food allergies, bloating, and constipation are common. Foods aren't assimilated well, so even on a seemingly adequate diet, there may be some internal malnutrition. And the solution to your gut health problems does not involve extremes or severe restrictions in the long run, as these can make your health worse in an attempt to starve microbes or suppress symptoms. But here's some good news. The lining of your gut is replaced every 3 days, meaning really long gut healing protocols doesn't make any sense. If you're still trying to fix your gut several months or several years later, the approach isn't working. With good energy metabolism, fixing your gut shouldn't take months and months and months. And on top of that, your gut microbiome can change within a single day based on what you eat. So personally, we believe in a rather standoffish approach for the gut, as I believe that we should not try to interfere with Mother Nature. The microbiome is incredibly complex, and rather trying to micro-manipulate, I believe in giving her the tools and resources and letting her do her thing. Pooping 1 to 3 times a day and giving the digestive system adequate energy and nutrients, and she will fix herself. So, improving gut health involves improving overall energy production and metabolism, removing gut irritating foods and additives that can slow transit time, and temporarily removing your unique trigger foods to stop the inflammation cycle and give your body the space it needs to heal. It is important to meet your body where it's at, and you may have to avoid some foods while we create a new microbiome balance. But as things improve, you should be able to add foods back in. Unfortunately, exact steps to heal your gut will look slightly different person to person, as we all have different environments, both internally and externally. So in this guide, we provide you with the support in these modules and in the community groups. We provide you with the tools and the resources to experiment and finally move the needle forward with your gut health. So here's an outline of the entire gut health module 4-part series. In this first part, we are going to cover how the digestive system works. Part 2, we will cover some of the main reasons for gut issues. Part 3 will provide general gut support and our top tips to improve gut health once and for all. And in part 4, we'll go over some more specific digestive issues like GERD, IBS, dysbiosis, leaky gut, fungal overgrowth, and SIBO. Now, if you don't want to nerd out about the different parts of the digestive tract in this module, feel free to skip to the next module of the series where we cover general gut support. But I do believe that understanding how the digestive system works will help you better understand why your gut is in its current state as it is right now. All right, let's dive in. How the digestive system works. So, like I've said, it's extremely beneficial to understand how it works because having a rough understanding of its complexity helps you realize that every single part plays an important role, and it's silly to think that we can micromanage one small component. Our physiology is extremely complex. We have to give our bodies the tools it needs and let it do its thing. So let's provide an overview of how our bodies break down food, which consists of digestion, absorption, and elimination. So the digestion step, this breaks down food that we eat into micromolecular building blocks. In the absorption step, movement of these building blocks from the intestinal tube go into the body. And then elimination. This is the exit of waste and fiber that can't be absorbed, leaving the digestive tract as your poop. Technically, our digestive tract is a long tube that runs through the center of our body. It's an open system with one end at your mouth and the other end at your butt. It's technically outside of our bodies. The food only enters through the intestinal cell and into the bloodstream. It's then carried for processing, usually to the liver. So a well-functioning digestive system moves food through quickly and maintains proper structure to ensure the intestinal walls are selective for what is leaked into the body for absorption and utilization, minimizing inflammation and food reactions. So your digestive tract transforms the food you eat both mechanically and chemically, with the goal of moving food through you quickly to avoid excessive bacterial fermentation, while simultaneously breaking that food down into energy and nutrients for your body to use. So there are muscles along your digestive tract that help you physically move food from your mouth out the other side. And so peristalsis is the involuntary constriction and relaxation of these muscles that create wave-like movements that push the contents of the canal forward along the digestive tract. In addition, the chemical environment of each component of the digestive system is important to ensure the proper breakdown of food and nutrient absorption. So enzymes and enzymatic reactions are necessary to break down your food into smaller components. And the right environmental conditions, such as temperature and pH levels, which your body should maintain on its own, are necessary for these enzymatic reactions to occur. So let's now review the different parts of the digestive tract. So first, the mouth. Digestion technically begins before you start eating. In fact, just thinking about food triggers the production of saliva in your mouth, which contains salivary amylase, an enzyme that helps break down your food. But once you do put food in your mouth, chewing is a very important part of digestion. Chewing each bite into a fine mush ensures the food mixes well with these enzymes. Plus, the more you chew, the more digestive enzymes you will produce in your mouth, helping to further break down food and ease digestion. So, the goal of chewing is to break down food so that it loses texture. Remember, your stomach doesn't have teeth, so chewing is an important step to help reduce fermentation potential along your digestive tract. All right, next up, esophagus. So when you swallow, the food travels down your esophagus, which is a muscular tube that contracts as it moves food down to a sphincter, which empties the contents into your stomach. This sphincter should remain closed in between meals to prevent food and stomach acids from traveling back up. Next up, stomach. So your stomach holds food while it mixes with enzymes that continue to break down the food so that you can use it for energy. Your stomach produces acid, which starts the process of breaking down your food, helping to denature proteins and kill some of the bacteria and microbes on the food that you eat, because the food we eat is not sterile. So this environment of the stomach has an ideal pH range, and this is important to prevent microorganism overgrowths. Since a low pH can lead to a reduction in the number of microorganisms that are killed, and thus more bacteria can further enter into the digestive tract like the intestines and proliferate. Insufficient stomach acid will lead to incomplete digestion of your food, meaning you can send intact pieces of food further along your digestive tract, which can lead to food sensitivities and fermentation in your intestines. The ideal stomach pH also helps keep food inside your stomach and avoids pushing back up on that sphincter that connects to the esophagus to prevent food traveling back up. Incorrect stomach pH levels prohibit the sphincter from closing, which gives undigested food an opportunity to travel back up. Plus, stomach acid also helps with vitamin B12 absorption in the food that we eat. And so adequate stomach acid is required to cleave the vitamin B12 from the protein it is bound to. Next up, liver and pancreas. So the liver and pancreas are not located along the digestive tract, but they still play vital roles in digestion. Your liver is responsible for producing and secreting bile, which is then stored in the gallbladder. So bile is composed of water, bile salts, which are acids, bilirubin, this is a breakdown product of red blood cells, and fats, so cholesterol, fatty acids, and phosphatidylcholine. So this bile is then released into the intestine to help break down your dietary fats. Without it, fat would just pass right through us, along with all those very important fat-soluble vitamins. So while the primary purpose of bile is to help us absorb fat from our food, bile has many actions that are important to prevent SIBO, dysbiosis, and overgrowths by keeping bacterial counts in the small intestine low and maintaining the health and balance of the microbiome. So here's a few benefits of bile that they help with. So they signal and regulate the peristalsis waves that move food through our digestive tract. They support the health of the gut lining since bile acids increase tight junction protein synthesis. They regulate microbiome balance since they have strong antimicrobial actions in the small intestine and support the health of beneficial commensal bacteria. Bile increases motility in the colon, and bile reduces the amount of bacteria backflow from the colon back up into the small intestine. In fact, when bile binds to a receptor in the ileum, which is the part of the small intestine closest to the colon, and this houses a ton of bacteria, antimicrobial agents are secreted to prevent bacterial growth in the ileum. So, obviously, lower levels of bile acids in the gut are associated with overgrowths, constipation, and increased bacterial translocation from the gut to other tissues, which we obviously do not want. So here's a quote from Dr. Ray Peat, quote, "Normally, our intestine and liver destroy most of the endotoxin before it reaches the general circulation. The bile acids, a major end product of cholesterol, have a detergent action in the intestine that usually keeps endotoxin in solution, away from the absorptive surfaces of the intestine. If the flow of bile is obstructed, endotoxin is allowed to enter the system. Estrogen can inhibit the flow of bile. And a mucus lining is part of the protective barrier, but the microscopic integrity of the intestinal cells themselves finally regulates the passage of materials into the blood and lymphatic vessels. End quote. So as you can see, bile acids have a significant impact on metabolism and regulation of energy homeostasis, and adequate production of bile acids are a very vital step in digestion. Okay, we covered liver, now pancreas. So again, your pancreas isn't along your digestive tract, but it still plays a very important role because your pancreas creates enzymes that assist with food breakdown, which are carried to your digestive tract through ducts and are emptied into the top of your small intestine. Each day, your pancreas makes about 8 ounces of digestive juices filled with enzymes, which include lipase, which works with bile from the liver to break down fat, protease, which breaks down protein, and amylase, which helps break down starches into easier to digest carbohydrates. The pancreas also produces several hormones to help regulate blood sugar and other digestive processes. For example, some of the hormone gastrin is produced in the pancreas, which signals to the stomach to produce stomach acids. Amylin is a hormone that helps control appetite and tells the stomach to empty its contents. Plus, the digestive juices from the pancreas also contain several antibiotic-like substances, which just help regulate the microbiome and keep bacteria in check. So another very important part of your digestive system are microorganisms. So the community of microbial cells in our gut, called the gut microbiome, consists of bacteria, archaea, fungi, and viruses. And it's now pretty well known that our microbiome plays an integral role in our overall health. We are one with microbes, and the current estimate of bacteria count in a human is 3.8 times 10 to the 13th, and the number of human cells is about 3 times 10 to the 13th. So we are one with microbes. And we have a symbiotic relationship with them. We provide the microbes with an environment conducive to its development, so proper moisture, temperature, pH, and nutrients essential to its survival, like vitamin D. And then the microbes provide us a certain number of functions that are indispensable to our body, like producing bioactive compounds that humans cannot make, including B vitamins. The microbiota is also capable of producing energetic compounds from food that human cells are unable to digest, like fiber, which can benefit our intestinal cells since they can use this source of energy to function properly, meaning they extract everything they can out of the food waste that moves through us and provide energy that the cells of our gut lining can use to maintain structure. The constituent members of the gut microbiome community play an important role in determining the overall structure and function of the community. The proper balance supports symbiotic microbial species and suppresses the growth of competitive species. And your gut microbiome composition can change depending on lifestyle, such as getting sunlight or vitamin D3 supplementation to ensure that our vitamin D stores are high enough, since good gut bacteria need vitamin D to grow and survive. It can also change based on medications, diet composition, and the systemic metabolic health of the individual. An optimal gut microbiome composition is not known and has not been established, and there isn't really a model we should technically shoot for. However, the species present in healthy human gut microbiomes across a wide variety of populations actually exhibit less structural and functional variation than we previously believed. This is discussed by Dr. Stacy Gomanek, who believes that the reason why the same foursome of bacterial species that's found in every human with a, quote, healthy gut all over the world is because each of the four make at least one B vitamin and needs other B vitamins that the other three species make and share. Here's a quote from Dr. Gomanek, quote, "The four species that make up the normal microbiome are also commensal. Each excrete at least one B vitamin that the other three need but cannot make." In other words, they need each other. They are a commensal foursome, and they are secreting those vitamins into our intestine, making a sort of B vitamin soup. It's hard to try to micro-manipulate the microbiome composition in our gut, but the body is able to create this natural balance of commensal beneficial bacteria when given the tools and energy it needs. So our food contents travel down the esophagus and enter the stomach, where they are mixed with stomach acids and enzymes. The food particles are then carried into the intestines along with digestive juices from the pancreas and the liver. First the small intestine, then the large intestine. And the intestines are where most of these microbial species reside. The large majority of these bacteria are in our colon, otherwise known as the large intestine, since this is the slowest moving part of our digestive tract. Now, the small intestine, which comes before the large intestine, isn't sterile, but it is relatively sterile compared to the large intestine. The small intestine contains three parts. The top part, which is right after the stomach, it's called the duodenum. And this contains 1,000 to 100,000 CFUs, which is colony forming units of bacteria present per gram. Then the middle part, which is the jejunum, and that contains 100,000 to 10 million CFU per gram. And then the last part, right before the large intestine, is called the ileum, and that contains between 10 million and 100 million CFU per grams. So those seem large, but then compare those numbers to the large intestine, which contains numbers I can't even present the number of zeros. It's on the screen, but we've got basically 100 billion up to close to 1,000 billion CFU per grams. So essentially what I just wanted to share on this slide is that your large intestine just contains so many more microbes than the small intestine. And that's just because that's the slowest moving part of the digestive tract. In the small intestine, we see bacteria present in the millions. In the large intestine, we see bacteria present in the billions. And remember, 1 billion is 1,000 millions. So it's a lot. So you can now understand why we see an emphasis on the large intestine when we're discussing the gut microbiome, because the small intestine is relatively sterile and shouldn't contain as many bacteria. Okay, so small intestine, we understand that these microbial species reside in the intestines, but what are the actual functions of the small and large intestine? So overall, there's a great deal of enzymatic digestion in the small intestine, and most of our nutrients, vitamins, and minerals are absorbed in the small intestine, which is about 22 feet in length. The result of this enzymatic digestion is the breakdown of larger food particles into smaller nutrient molecules, small enough to be absorbed through the intestinal wall and into the bloodstream. So for carbohydrates, this means disaccharides are broken down into monosaccharides, which are simple single unit sugars like glucose. And for proteins, this means individual amino acids. So this means you're breaking down larger protein compounds into the individual building blocks, the amino acids. And lastly, for lipids, this means breaking down the fats into specific fatty acids. Architecturally, the small intestine is divided into those three sections that we reviewed earlier. So the first, the duodenum. And while it's short with respect to the other two sections, this segment is actually very important to the digestive processes, as it has incoming ducts from the liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas. And so these ducts from the gallbladder, liver, and pancreas gradually join together to form one stream that exits into this duodenum at the papilla of Vater. So these incoming fluids through this duct neutralize stomach acids and further drive the digestion of proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. There are also more peristaltic contractions here to further mechanically process food, and some water, electrolytes, and water-soluble nutrients are absorbed here. Next up, the second part, the jejunum, and this comprises of about 40% of the total length of the small intestine, and it continues many of the same digestive processes for proteins, carbs, and lipids, but it is also a major location of water absorption. And then number 3, the ileum. It makes up over 50% of the small intestine, and it empties into the large intestine. Some enzymatic digestion and nutrient absorption continues in this segment, but compared to the jejunum, the ileum has a less plentiful blood supply, and its peristaltic contractions are slower, which makes sense why the bacterial population is starting to increase in this part of the small intestine. And along the small intestine, there are these small villi that line the walls and absorb nutrients. Next up is the large intestine, which performs some final nutrient absorption steps, and it helps compact waste for removal and exit through our poop. Food travels from the small intestine to the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. And this is a muscular sphincter, which receives signals from surrounding nerves, and it's located between the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, and the cecum, which is the first portion of the large intestine. And it is a one-way valve that is supposed to allow digested foods to pass from the small intestine into the large intestine and then remain closed and keep waste materials in the large intestine from flowing back up into the small intestine. So it should be closed a majority of the time and then open briefly to allow contents to move from the small intestine to the large intestine. Food and waste actually moves upwards along the ascending part of the colon before traveling along the transverse colon, which is the horizontal part in the middle, and then down the descending colon on the right side. Isn't that upward motion incredible? And it just shows that food doesn't necessarily move through you using gravity. Energy is required for muscles to physically move things through you. So by the time food mixes with digestive juices, and by the time that reaches your large intestine, otherwise known as your colon, much of the digestion and absorption has already taken place, but the colon isn't just a waste passageway. The high concentration of bacteria plays a role in extracting everything it can out of your food. And so the food particles that reach the colon are typically fibrous matter, things that human cells can't really utilize. So the ideal microbes in your large intestine will break some of this down to provide us with a little more energy and nutrients. Anything that is remaining after this process is then propelled toward the rectum for elimination through your poop. So food matter moves through much more slowly in the large intestine relative to the small intestine. And as a consequence, this is where we see the largest concentration of gut microbes, and that is normal. But with the billions of microbes present, how on earth does the body ensure that there is a good balance between the beneficial bacteria and pathogenic bacteria? Well, the internal environment of the colon, specifically the oxygen level, in part prevents dysbiosis and maintains this balance. Before we continue and discussing the importance of maintaining a low oxygen environment in our guts, we need to cover a few vocabulary words. So aerobic versus anaerobic and obligate versus facultative. First, aerobic versus anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, this is when an organism generates energy in the presence of oxygen, and the products of this reaction are CO2, water, and a high level of ATP, around 35 molecules of ATP. Then anaerobic respiration is when an organism generates energy in the absence of oxygen. And so the products of this reaction are lactic acid and only 2 molecules of ATP. So this is discussed more in depth in the intro chapter of the course, and both are necessary at different times and locations throughout the body. Now, obligate versus facultative. Obligate anaerobes, these are organisms that cannot grow in the presence of oxygen since they can't perform aerobic respiration. They depend on fermentation and anaerobic respiration using a final electron acceptor other than oxygen. So they do not do well in high oxygen environments. Facultative anaerobes, on the other hand, show better growth in the presence of oxygen, and so they can survive in oxygen-rich environments. So now, given these vocabulary words, let's return back to microbiome balance. So clearly, the microbiome is extremely complex, and while it is near impossible to define what the ideal microbiome should look like, because resident microbes are highly diverse, they vary between individuals, and they change with diet. Recent evidence in the literature supports that colonic bacteria should be dominated by obligate anaerobic bacteria, meaning they cannot survive in high oxygen environments. And these are able to benefit us by breaking down those non-usable fibers that make it into the large intestine. Now, we will always have some amount of both obligate and facultative species, but the new science is showing that the relative balance between the two plays a role in dysbiosis. And these are categories, so individual bacteria species are either obligate or facultative. Balanced gut microbiomes are characterized by the dominance of obligate anaerobes in organisms, while an expansion and increase in facultative organisms is a common marker of gut dysbiosis. Since these obligate anaerobes function without oxygen, they're typically slow growing and they don't produce as much gas as a byproduct of their metabolism. Instead, they produce short chain fatty acids from fiber and other waste products that we can't use as humans. These anaerobes make up the very last part of digestion, and most of the food that reaches the colon should be mostly done digesting. So then the goal of these colonic microbes is to extract energy from the less than ideal sources and then produce short chain fatty acids so that our colonocytes have an energy source and our colon can move out waste. Thus, the inside of the colon should be a low oxygen and high CO2 environment to ensure that we have dominance of obligate anaerobes that can break down complex carbs and provide our cells with short-chain fatty acids, and lower levels of facultative organisms, since these facultative anaerobic bacteria do not specialize in consuming fiber, and they're going to interfere with host nutrition. So when we have more of these facultative organisms, we can't get the benefits of these obligate anaerobes, that we get more energy from these obligate anaerobes digesting fibers, and facultative organisms can wreak havoc. So maintaining a low oxygen environment in our colon helps keep the microbiome in check. So here's an image from a research paper, and a quote from the paper is, "There is a steep radial gradient of oxygen in the intestines. Bacteria are not static under physiologic conditions and are highly influenced by the oxygen tension in the mucosa layer." So when oxygen enters the colon, this can encourage dysbiosis by supporting the growth of the facultative bacteria. And so this is just another example of how internal environment impacts function. And you cannot maintain a low oxygen, high CO2 gut without a good metabolism and strong energy production. But this internal environment can only be maintained with strong gut lining cells called epithelial cells, otherwise called colonocytes. And they are constantly regenerating. As we mentioned earlier, these regenerate every 3 days. And colonocytes require adequate energy to perform their functions properly. And this brings us to the next important part of the digestive system, which is the gut lining. And this refers to the lining of the intestines. So the intestinal lumen, which is the inside space of a tubular structure, here the intestine, is lined by a layer of these epithelial cells. And their primary functions include digesting and absorbing nutrients, but also forming the intestinal barrier, and the strength of which helps determine what leaks out of the gut, or gut leakiness. So the lining of our gut serves as a dynamic interface between our body and the food and pathogens that enter into our gastrointestinal tract. These cells have a high turnover rate, meaning they're constantly renewing, with some estimates of only a 3-day life cycle, which is a good thing. The gut lining can renew and heal relatively quickly if given the chance to do so. Quote, "Epithelial cells are an extremely important component of the intestinal barrier. They are continually undergoing cell death and renewal, being constantly replaced from the pluripotent stem cells," end quote. So the metabolism of these cells, meaning how they make energy, will change the internal environment of the gut, meaning what will the inside of the gut contain, higher oxygen or higher CO2? Remember, we want higher CO2 and less oxygen in the gut to maintain proper microbiome balance, because that will impact the types of bacteria that can thrive. So these gut lining cells have 2 options to generate energy: beta oxidation or glycolysis. Ideally, they perform oxidative phosphorylation through beta oxidation of those short-chain fatty acids. One example of short-chain fatty acids is butyrate, which is a byproduct of microbial fermentation through those obligate bacteria. This is the type of bacteria that we want to dominate in our colon. It's also present in some food like butter. So you can see how all these things are connected, and it's a feed-forward cycle. When we have higher amounts of obligate anaerobes that are using the fibrous material that gets to our colon and using that and producing short-chain fatty acids as a byproduct, our gut lining cells can then use those short-chain fatty acids for energy production and maintain a high CO2 and low oxygen environment so that these obligate anaerobes can continue to thrive. So these short-chain fatty acids are not only used to make energy by the gut lining cells, but the presence of them is actually what signals to these gut lining cells to perform beta oxidation instead of the backup pathway glycolysis. So the process of converting these short-chain fatty acids into energy through beta oxidation uses up a lot of oxygen, which helps to maintain that low oxygen environment inside the colon. So short-chain fatty acids play a vital role in feeding the cells that line our guts and serve as signaling molecules to encourage the right type of energy production, because excess glycolysis will not allow us to maintain that low oxygen environment in the gut. Inflammatory signals or low systemic energy production can shift these gut lining cell metabolism towards anaerobic glycolysis, which is not what we want, because this will lower oxygen consumption, lower ATP generation, which ultimately leads to a shift in the microbial community from being dominated by obligate to instead being dominated by facultative anaerobic bacteria. That will then encourage dysbiosis. So the left side of this image is what we want to happen, where there's a low oxygen environment. The epithelial cells perform beta oxidation, which uses up a lot of oxygen and produces a lot of ATP. Then on the right side, the gut lining cells instead perform glycolysis. Less oxygen is used, so the inside of the gut has higher oxygen levels and creates an ideal environment for facultative bacteria to thrive, inducing dysbiosis. Plus, excessive glycolysis means less energy is produced, so the gut lining cells will have less energy to maintain proper structure and function. When functioning properly, meaning we have strong epithelial cells producing energy well, the gut lining is supposed to have selective permeability, meaning it should be able to tightly control the flow of substances in and out of the gut. No, you are not broken. You can fix your gut. The better your gut lining and the better your metabolic rate, the more food you can tolerate. With a leaky gut, the intestinal wall is compromised and particles start crossing the barrier that normally would not, triggering inflammation and undesirable symptoms. Some of these contents include undigested foods like large proteins, large carbs, and endotoxins. Endotoxins are toxic substances that are bound to the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria that are released upon cell death, like when the bacterium ruptures or disintegrates. Another name for endotoxins that's used in the literature is lipopolysaccharides, LPS, since they are surface glycolipids. There's a long list of gram-negative bacteria, but common examples are E. coli, Klebsiella, pneumonia, H. pylori, and Enterobacteria geigy. Gram-positive bacteria have a different structure and do not produce endotoxins. They trigger an innate immune response, activating the immune system and producing inflammatory cytokines. Essentially, endotoxins are waste products released when certain bacteria species die that are known to trigger acute and chronic inflammation. And bacteria in our gut divide somewhere between once every 12 minutes and once every 24 hours. So endotoxins are always present in the gut to some degree, but endogenous production is upregulated with gut distress, which can trigger acute and chronic inflammation. Plus, in a healthy, not very permeable gut, the endotoxins largely stay in the gut and are broken down. But alterations in the intestinal barrier may lead to entry of these endotoxins into the bloodstream. So let's just summarize the main takeaway about the gut lining. The energetic state of the cells that line the gut lining not only impacts gut permeability, so what leaks out of the gut, but also the energetic state also determines the microbiome balance by controlling the oxygen level inside the gut. So these gut lining cells function best when they have butyrate as an energy source, whether that's from the food we eat like butter, from fermentation of obligate anaerobes, which is the type of bacteria that we want in our gut that can only survive in low oxygen environments, or both. Butyrate oxidation by the mitochondria inside these gut lining cells consumes high amounts of oxygen, which maintains a low oxygen environment inside the colon. So when this food source doesn't exist, the gut lining cells don't produce energy efficiently and rely more on glycolysis, which doesn't use up as much oxygen, thus producing a high oxygen state inside the gut. So this type of high oxygen environment allows facultative anaerobes and pathogens to take over. Here's a quote from the literature, quote, "The energy metabolism of colonic epithelial cells functions as a control switch of the gut microbiota, mediating shifts between homeostatic and dysbiotic communities," end quote. A low oxygen environment inside the colon ensures the colonic microbiota is dominated by what we want, obligate anaerobic bacteria, which provide benefit to us by converting fiber and food waste into short-chain fatty acids, which is the ideal food source for the cells that line our gut. Higher oxygen levels inside the colon increase the population of facultative anaerobic bacteria. So epithelial metabolism shapes your microbiome. So instead of trying to micro-manipulate the microbiome, the body finds the right balance of microbes when given the right environment and sufficient energy levels. So let's return back to the components of the digestive tract and cover a few more important parts to wrap this up. The leftover waste in the colon is then excreted out through the rectum to the anus, your butthole, as poop. Your bowel movements are 50 to 55% gut flora by mass, meaning there's a huge turnover of these bacteria colonies to keep their count levels up. They go really quickly. So the point here demonstrates that we should be pooping every day. You don't want this mass of microbes and waste just sitting inside of you for reabsorption. You're also reabsorbing hormones, bile, endotoxin, and other waste. Now, we can't conclude this section without talking about the gut-brain axis. And the gut-brain axis refers to the interactions between the enteric nervous system in our GI tract, which is like the brain of the gut, and the central nervous system, CNS, through a bidirectional two-way highway communication system using a number of mechanisms, including neurotransmitters and hormones. In fact, your gut is now recognized as the largest endocrine organ in the body, producing a number of hormones and bioactive peptides. Hormone health and gut health are intricately connected. 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut, which is now no longer viewed as the happy hormone and is something we do not want in excess, as this contributes to the negative serotonin, estrogen, endotoxin, histamine cycle. Yep, your gut has a nervous system. This enteric nervous system contains as many nerves as the spinal cord, over 500 million neurons that innervate the smooth muscle cells that line the intestine. As a result, it regulates basic gut functions such as gut motility, intestinal mixing, peristaltic contractions, and intestinal permeability. So this bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain is accomplished through the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system. And low vagal tone can lead to gut dysfunction and dysbiosis, but also dysbiosis can lead to low vagal tone. Understanding these mechanisms helps you realize that the state of your digestive system impacts how your body operates as a system. Poor gut health will lead to poor systemic health. So the final step in your gut digestive system is the cleanup. So after you've digested your food, a very important part of a well-functioning digestive system is cleanup. And this digestive tract cleanup is coordinated by something called the MMC, migrating motor complex. And this refers to a series of muscle contractions that happen in our gut while fasting between meals. It cleans up shop before we eat another meal. It's like cooking a meal and then cleaning the kitchen. Before we cook a meal again, we must clean up our mess. So here's a quote from the literature. Quote, "The MMC is the gastric and small intestinal motor pattern of the interdigestive state. The interdigestive pattern of small intestinal motility begins after digestion and absorption of nutrients are complete 2 to 3 hours after a meal and is called the migrating motor complex, MMC." End quote. So these housekeeping waves are a pattern of electrical activity that start in the stomach and move through the small intestine to physically move undigested food particles through the digestive tract. It's responsible for that stomach rumbling you experience between meals. And if you don't get that rumbling sensation, this is a sign that your MMC isn't working properly. So the MMC was first described in 1968 when a researcher named Dr. Suzarsky recorded intestinal migrating myoelectrical activity in dogs and observed changes in this activity according to a cyclic pattern. He showed that the activity stops upon eating a meal and suggested that it induces a motor activity that acts as an interdigestive housekeeper in the small intestine. So the purpose of the MMC is to help move food particles and debris through the bowel. It serves to transport bacteria from the small intestine to the large intestine and prevent migration of bacteria from the large intestine back up into the small intestine, which can lead to SIBO. So when the MMC kicks in, there's an increase in enzyme and bile secretions to help digest leftover matter and move it through. Now, this is to help us keep our digestive tract clean. A well-functioning MMC doesn't produce sterility, but it does keep the number of bacteria in the small intestine in check. So it keeps it to a minimum. And this is vital to prevent undigested food particles from harboring and encouraging bacterial fermentation. So the MMC is only activated when you are not eating. It's kind of like having two computer modes for the intestine, like binary on or off. So here it is, eating mode and cleaning mode. These waves happen in a cycle throughout the day, typically around every 3 hours for most people, but this can vary a lot. So the number of calories and the nature of food determines the length in between cycles. Fats will cause a longer delay in the next MMC wave relative to carbs, which causes a longer delay relative to protein. So our body regulates the MMC through hormone secretion and nervous system regulation. So for hormones, using motilin and ghrelin. So motilin is produced in the small bowel and acts mostly on the stomach, causing the stomach muscles to contract. And you have highest levels of motilin when you're in the fasted state, and then the levels decrease again when you eat food. And then ghrelin is released from our body during fasted states in response to low blood sugar. Now, in terms of nervous system components that help regulate the MMC, it involves vagus nerve, enteric nervous system, which is the nerve cells that line the walls of the intestine. And so disruption to either the vagus nerve or the enteric nervous system can result in dysfunction of the MMC. Other things that disrupt the MMC include low thyroid function, so low systemic energy production, narcotics like opioids, like OxyContin, Vicodin, codeine, morphine, fentanyl, etc. Another thing that disrupts the MMC is stress. Here's a quote from the literature, quote, "When subjects underwent a long period of intermittent mental stress, total abolition of migrating motor complexes under stress." So acute physiological stress profoundly suppresses the MMC motility in otherwise healthy subjects, just showing again how stress can hinder physiology. And the reason being is that chronic stress may decrease the tone or strength of the vagus nerve, which will then decrease MMC activity. And stress impacts the enteric nervous system, since the enteric nervous system is most like the parasympathetic branch of our nervous system, which oversees the rest and digest. And so this operates in the opposite manner to the sympathetic nervous system. And in sympathetic nervous system activation, digestion is not a priority. It is trying to conserve energy to properly function. This is a stressed out state. And so blood supply is shunted to the muscles so that we can run away from the bears, any incoming threats. And then blood supply is shuttled away from the digestive system because in a threatening situation, digestion is not a main priority. So this will reduce oxygen and nutrients to the digestive system and reduce peristalsis, muscle movement in the intestines. And MMC functionality is disrupted by bacterial overgrowths, but a disruption of the MMC causes bacterial overgrowths. And so it's really important to make sure that we are pooping every day to prevent these types of overgrowths, which is going to hold you back. So as you can see, the digestive system is a very intricate and complex process. You can't isolate any one digestive process from the rest. You have to get the entire system to work in an orchestrated effort, and micro-manipulating this complex system is almost an impossible feat. It is a system, not individual parts, and truly every step of the process is important, or else we wouldn't have that component in our body. Digestion is also a very energy-intensive process where all the components of the digestive process require energy to metabolize the food we eat. It takes energy to get more energy. Some estimate that more than 10% of our metabolism is used to digest food, and that is a significant amount. And it will be downregulated and slowed down if our body is not good at producing energy. Digestion is not an essential task like maintaining our heartbeat. So when energy reserves are low, something's got to go, and the body will pull energy away from digestion, making it not function properly. If someone is eating foods that are difficult to digest and gives them little in return, like just only relying on salads, then it's no wonder they have low energy. With less energy, the body has fewer resources, and so digestion is turned down further, which then makes the situation worse. It's a vicious cycle resulting in more digestive upset and less energy. So in the next module, we'll go over why some people have compromised digestion. And then, of course, in part 3, discuss how we can finally fix gut health once and for all.